Silent. Leg of the leg of this thing because it's in front of. Did it move? Right next to the leg of the chair. So if I move it all, there's no time now. It's only like a few minutes left. Myself situated in here, and then I'm not going to move. I promise. No. It's okay. I just don't want to make sure that I didn't mess up the shot.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I have plenty of space. It's just when I get in and out, that's all. Can you show me how my screen? Oh, ah, the mic is not in the way, right? Okay, good. Actually, I should put this computer. Om Amriteshwarye Namaha. Om Amriteshwarye Namaha. Om Amriteshwarye Namaha. Om Parthaya Pradibodhitam Bhagavata Narayanena Swayam Vyasena Gratitam Purana Munina Madhye Mahabharatam Advaitamritavarshinim Bhagavatim Ashtadashadhyayinim Ambatvam Anusandadhami Bhagavad Gita Bhavadveshinim. Namostute Namostute Vyasa Vishala Buddhe Pullara Vindayata Patra Netra Yena Tvaya Bharata Taila Purnaha Prajvalito Jnanamaya Pradipaha Prapanna Parijataya Totra Vetraikapanai Jnanamudraya Krishnaya Gitamrita Duhe Namaha. Sarvopanishado Gavo Dogdha Gopalanandanaha. Partho Vatsya Sudhir Bhokta Dugdham Gitamritam Mahata. Vasudeva Sutam Devam Kamsachanura Mardanam. Devaki Paramanandam Krishnam Vande Jagadgurum. Om Amriteshwari Namaha. Thank you all for joining us again today. We are in chapter 14 of the Bhagavad Gita, and we have covered so far up to verse 10. And in this chapter so far, Krishna is trying to impress upon us that samsara is due to the three gunas, or what we call triguna, and these belong to Prakriti. If you remember, Prakriti is the concept, the Vedantic concept of the root of all creation. And in the dissolution of the universe, it's Mula Prakriti, it is just in seed form. But when the creation takes place, then all inert matter emerges from Prakriti. This is the concept. And so all the gunas belong to that Prakriti as well. Gunas means attributes or sattva, rajas, and tamas, mixtures of those three. Later, Krishna will point out that the only way to get out of samsara is to go beyond those three gunas, or to become a gunatitaha, as it is called. By discussing various aspects regarding the gunas now, it's going to be easier for Krishna to make his main point later. What did he say so far? Well, he talked about the nature of the three gunas, saying that sattva has a nature of being luminous and pure. Rajas has the nature of attachment, and tamas has the nature of delusion. Then he went on to explain how each of these gunas deludes all or binds all of us in different ways. So sattva makes a person attached to peace and quiet and external knowledge. And Rajoguna binds us by making us attached to action. We become like workaholics and restless constantly. This is the very common quality we see in people today. And tamas binds us through carelessness, lethargy, and sleep. We all know what it's like to feel like, I don't want to get up. I just want to stay asleep for a little while longer. That attachment to sleep is a very clear manifestation of tamas that all of us experience. Now, after that explanation, before he would go on to the next topic, he just repackaged his teaching in verse 10. And the point is that even though everybody has these three gunas in the body and the mind and intellect, the proportion of each guna varies from person to person. And if that variation were not there, there would be no way for the whole creation to take place. It can only take place because there are different levels and different combinations of these three gunas. So there's only one condition under which all the matter in Prakriti is equal in the gunas, and that is the pralayam, when there's no creation at all. It's all balanced. And as soon as the creation starts, the gunas are distributed in various ways through different channels, through different forms and subtle forms and concrete forms. So during the creation, even the gods have their own properties. Some of them are more energetic, some of them are more sattvic, and some of them have the preside over the tamas guna, tamo guna. They're not ruled by it, they rule over the guna. But there are distribution of gunas, even for the gods. So just think about us. We definitely are going to have variation in the gunas in our physical and subtle bodies. And based on the predominance of these gunas in a person, we would call them a sattvic person or a rajasic person or tamasic person, or animals also, we can refer to them in that way. And we saw also last week that if we want moksha, first thing is we have to increase the sattva in our life and our mind and our intellect, everything. So the only way to do that is to overcome tamas with rajas, and then also overcome rajas with sattva. And the reason why is because only through self-knowledge can a person attain liberation. But in order to attain attain that self-knowledge, a person has to have a sattvic mind. You have to learn from the guru, learn from the scriptures, do a lot of spiritual practice to convert all these lower gunas to sattva. So it's only when we get a preponderance of sattva that we can even start to understand the scriptures. And we could even say that one of the reasons why Amma came was to help us convert the lower gunas to sattva and then go beyond even sattva. Some people may feel, due to the force of their own gunas, that it's hopeless. I was born tamasic or I was born rajasic and I just can't change it. Well, that is a fatalistic approach to it, but we have to remember we have Amma in our life. And when we have Amma in our life, nothing is impossible. The only thing that our job, our dharma is to make effort, sincere effort, constant effort, whatever we can do. And when we cannot overcome something, we pray to Amma, and that is a form of effort also. Please help me, I can't do this, I don't have the strength, give me the strength to overcome this obstacle I'm facing right now. And the more sincere effort we make, the more grace we will invoke in her, and with that grace, anything is possible. And we also talked about that counter-attack strategy that I mentioned a few seconds ago, that when we feel we're kind of overcome by tamas, we don't try to meditate, don't try to, do something that requires sattva. You have to be active. That's why Amma tells people who are trying to meditate but falling asleep, they say, stand up. And she used to tell us to go around and around in circles until we, became refreshed, and then we could sit back down again. And if someone was really sleeping, she had these little pebbles, and she would throw them at people and to keep them, give them a jolt. That jolt is rajas, to wake them out of their stupor. So this is the need for rajas comes when we have tamas in us, and we all have plenty of tamas. We should not think that we're free from it just because we're interested in spirituality. Because if Amma didn't give us a lot of seva, we would all become lazy. Lazy doesn't mean you're just sleeping all day. Laziness is actually includes selfishness. So we'll do something if it's good for us or helpful for us or pleasant for us, but we won't do anything for anybody else. So seva and selfless service is a way to broaden our mind also, which is essential for spirituality. So the selfless service or seva that we do is not just for society, it's also removing the tamas guna, tamo guna within us and helping us to progress. So looking at the big picture of society, we can also say that householder life is very well orchestrated to take a selfish young person, I guess we would say, before we get married, and have kids. We're very self-centered. You get married, you have a spouse, and then you have kids, perhaps. And then every time, each step of the way, you have to sacrifice some of your selfishness. And as a result, and then you have all these duties, so you have to do a lot more work that you had than before. You can't just be thinking only of yourself. So invariably, householders are catapulted into a lot more activity than before, at least selfless activity. It's not only for themselves. And that purifies them. And then at one point later in life, they've done their duty. They understand that their role is, basically completed. And so then they can start to slowly withdraw from society, from the house, the family duties, and they can focus more on their spiritual life. And that is where we convert the rajas that we needed during householder time and convert that to sattva. Because now when your householder duties are completed, you can apply yourself a lot more to spiritual pursuits. And for that, you're going to need sattva. And I include myself because even though I didn't get married this time, I'm sure I've been married many, many times before in past births. So this is just one out of who knows how many millions of births. So then that later phase where everybody, whether they're householders or not, focuses only on spiritual practices. This is more like upasana, an expanded concept of bhakti yoga, where we do a lot of different spiritual practices, but they all include some kind of name and form. We haven't reached the formless yet. The formless is another level. We need a lot of sattva guna to really practice that kind of spirituality. So you go from tamas, which is to remove the tamas, we need karma yoga. To convert the rajas, which is replacing the tamas, in order to replace that rajas with sattva, we need upasana. And then we need the formless absolute kind of spiritual, we call it Vedanta Vichara, and learning, contemplating and meditating on those teachings. That helps us go beyond, assimilating the teachers especially helps us go beyond even sattva. So after hearing Krishna's explanation of all these three gunas, people might be getting curious about their own nature. How can I understand where I am right now? Am I tamas? Am I rajas? Or am I sattva? What am I? Or which one is dominant in me, in my mind, in my body, in my intellect? So if it's like sattva, will my aura become like shiny white? And then if it's rajas, it'll be like red. Swami is probably really rajasic because he's wearing red, And then there's people who are tamasic and, they have a dark aura or something. It doesn't have to be so occult, really. There are some very clear indicators that tell us what guna is dominant in a person, in ourselves, or in us in different times of the day, in our lifetime. So this is the next topic in the chapter. Krishna is going to give the indications of each of these gunas. He taught us the nature, how they bind, and now he's going to talk about how we can sort of differentiate and discern which guna is dominant at any time. So that's going to be verses 11 through 13, and we will read verse 11 together now. Sarvadvareshu Dehesmin Prakasha Upajayate Jnanam yada tada vidyad vivruddham sattvam. When the light of knowledge, I'm editing it, okay? When the light of knowledge shines through all the gateways of the body, then it should be known that sattva is dominant. What I did was I put the intelligence and discrimination in parentheses, and I wrote the direct translation, which is just knowledge, and shines through seemed to be a little bit better, because actually it's really only referring to the gateways. It doesn't specifically mention the senses and the mind. It talks about the gateways of the body. And predominant rather than predominant, I felt dominant is a little bit better. They're similar, but a little subtly. There's a subtle difference. The reason why I make these modifications is because the people, the team that put together the Ashram Bhagavad Gita, they didn't have the chance to talk like this, with the readers. They just felt, based on Shankaracharya Bhasha, most of the things that are added in there are to help us understand what it really means without lengthy commentary. But since we're going to hear the commentary anyhow, I'm giving you a more literal version of the verses. That's my intention. So Shankaracharya says that illumination is a function of the internal organ, or what we would call the intellect. So that illumination is coming through the intellect, and it's pouring through these gateways of the sense functions, the sense organs. That's what all the gateways refers to. It's the gateways of cognition, the sense organs like ear and eye, and etc. And these are known as the organs of knowledge in Vedanta, but we could call them the organs of perception to make it a little easier in English. And that's as opposed to the organs of action. See, in the Vedantic philosophy, there's two kinds of organs: the ones that perceive and the ones that act. So perception is the ones we typically think of, smell, hearing, tasting, etc. But the organs of action are like hands and legs, etc. Speech, like that. So the idea is that our eyes are the gates for perceiving forms, our ears are the gates for perceiving sound, and so on. So what does it mean when you say light shines through those gateways, those organs of perception? Shankaracharya says that it's a sign of knowledge, not self-knowledge, but clear perception. The knowledge of clear perception. There's nothing blocking your perception of things. And brightness means that they are powerful enough to grasp things quickly and efficiently. Those gateways, consider them to be powerful, efficient, alert, and vigilant. We're going to hear more about that in just a couple seconds here when we hear Jnanadev's commentary. But those gateways there will be sharp visual perception, alert hearing and listening, shraddha or awareness in every action, and that will all be accompanied by discernment. All the senses function properly at their best. This is the idea. Now, I'm going to have Jnanadev's commentary on each of the three gunas, which is so helpful, I find. So I'm going to read. It's a little bit long, but I'm sure you will enjoy it. When sattva dominates, the following signs appear. In the spring season, the fragrance in the lotus flower spreads out all around, unable to contain itself in the lotus. In that way, the light of knowledge overflows into the exterior, unable to contain itself in the interior. Then the intellect remains watchful in all the sense organs, and the hands and feet seem to have secured a wonderful vision. As a swan can discern which is milk and which is water, in that way the senses themselves test and decide what is proper and what is improper, what renders bad karma and what renders good karma, while comprehensive self-governance attends as their footman. His analogies are so beautiful. The ears instinctively abandon what should not be heard. The eyes eschew what should not be seen, while the tongue avoids uttering what should not be uttered. Just as darkness runs away from the light of a lamp, so the prohibited things dare not stand before his senses. How'd you like to have senses like that? That would just make spiritual life so easy. It doesn't come by, chance. It's the result of many, many lifetimes of sadhana. Just as a big river inundates the banks during monsoon, so too his intellect expands into all fields. Just as the brilliance of the moon rushes into the sky on a full moon night, so too the faculty of intellect spreads out freely in the region of knowledge. Desire contracts, and involvement in action ebbs away, while the mind feels an aversion to the enjoyment of sense objects. We should all pray for our mind like this. So this is his commentary, and one last thing you can keep in mind is that having sattva guna as dominant in our being or in a person's being is pretty much the same thing as having attained the sadhana chatushtaya. So we would call it a sadhana chatushtaya sampannan. It means somebody who has achieved or has the wealth of the four virtues like discernment, vairagya, non-attachment. And there was a long list. I can't go over it now. It came up in the Gita before, but a lot of spiritual qualities that are, it's called 4, but really there's 9 in total. We went over that in the ashram many times, but you can look it up. Sadhana chatushtaya. Now let us hear what Krishna has to say about Rajas, verse 12. We're going to have to pronounce the first half of the first line all together. You cannot really break this one up. Lobha pravrityarambaha karmanam ashama spriha rajasyetani jayante vivruddhe bharatarshava. Greed, activity, the undertaking of actions, restlessness, longing, these arise when Rajas is dominant, O Arjuna. So our Gita version adds in selfish, so we could put that in parentheses. It's true. It's just not in the original text. So through the commentaries, we can understand that's what it means. And thirst, longing, insofar as they are the same meaning, we could have either one. I just felt that longing was a little bit more, just felt better to me. And what is that longing for? Well, our Gita translation has it spelled out very clearly for enjoyment. It's not longing for God, in other words. So just so that no one would misunderstand that, I'm sure they added it for that reason. These arise when rajas is dominant. Okay, so greed was the first characteristic, right? Lobha. We may feel, okay, greed, that's other people. There's a lot of greedy people out there in the world. It's not me. But we really should come to terms with the fact that greed is not a foreign entity for us. Because really, it's a lot of different kinds of thoughts. If we think, I should have one of those, I want one of these, I need to get that status, or I have to attain this. This is important. These are all subtle manifestations of greed. And who doesn't think like that sometime in the course of the day? The only difference is that really greedy people have such thoughts constantly because they're never content with what they have. They always desire more and more. And Shankaracharya says here that greed means the desire to appropriate others' possessions. And after reading this for the first time in a long time, I thought to myself, that reminds me of one of Amma's teachings. She says that greed is taking more than what we need. That's all it is. So if you put these two together, it really makes sense, because if we take more than we need, we're essentially appropriating others' possessions that could have been helpful to somebody else. And we know that all the possessions in the world are not equally distributed by a long shot. So it all makes sense that if we yearn for, or have this desire for, or longing for more than what we need, that's greed. And I think that is a very tall order for us to fulfill, to remove that much of greed, because it's not just like people who have money for 200 lifetimes. It's us too. And once that greed gets a foothold in our mind, it is guaranteed that we will be prompted toward increased activity in order to fulfill our greed, our desires. And when we're not physically pursuing our desires, what are we doing? Does the activity stop? No. It re-expresses itself in the form of mental activity. We start planning our next move. What kind of physical activity is needed for me to achieve what I want? And we'll be sitting there or like lying in bed, but trying to go to bed. Okay, tomorrow morning, first thing I'm going to go and I'm going to call that guy and I'm going to get the information. Then I'm going to go to that place and talk with this guy and get the ball rolling, because it has to get starting soon. Then there might even be multiple potential scenarios that the mind wants to think about, and it has to find solutions for all of those beforehand. So it's constant planning, calculating, scheming, and all in our mental world also. So both the physical and mental worlds are full of activity. You might have noticed that he used two very similar words already: activity and the undertaking of actions. What's the difference? They sound very similar. Fortunately, Shankaracharya has made the distinction for us, a very subtle distinction. He says that activity means doing something or another all the time, while undertaking actions involves specific goals and activity. So let's say somebody's bored, they just mindlessly pick up their phone and start doing something on it. That's activity, because they just can't sit still. And a distinguishing characteristic of undertaking actions is that they never stop. As soon as one project or goal is over, we feel we need another one. We always have to have something to look forward to. We think we're looking forward to, but it just becomes a source of tension for us. But we think we have to have a goal, got to go to the next thing. And this reminds me of something that I learned before I joined the ashram, when I was working for the Japanese government in a small village in rural Japan. I was in this office. Everybody was smoking, except for me. And I would listen to these guys. And then one of the fellows asked me, "You know why I smoke so much?" And I said, "I have no idea." And he said, "When one cigarette is over, my fingers feel lonely. And so I have to light up another one. I was like, wow. At that time, I didn't understand that I had the same problem. It just wasn't a cigarette. It was a doing something. That's all it was. Their thing is a cigarette. Ours is doing something else. So Rajas will always compel us to do something. When you finish one thing, got to do the next one. It's just like another cigarette for a smoker. We have to look at these things, without bias. We should not assume that our behavior is okay and normal. Just like we think other people are weird for how they do their things, we are doing weird things too. We can't just sit still. And Rajas, another thing Rajas does, which always gets us into trouble, is we meddle in other people's activities, unnecessarily increasing our own activities, and out of proportion too, things we can't even handle. And then we might find that little small gains in our goals make us feel elated, whereas little setbacks make us feel really dejected. So all of these things, if it were a child, we could forgive them because they're childish and immature. But this is not very befitting of an adult, and especially not an adult seeker. So even if we are frequently engaged in seva, selfless service, somewhere along the way we have to draw the line and switch from active sadhana to stationary sadhana. You can't, reach God realization just by running around doing things. The mind, at this point, the mind does need a balance of both, some active service, sadhana, and some stationary sadhana. But even those who are highly active in the world, like business people and people who are very dynamic, a time will come when they have to start pulling themselves out of all the activity, their business, their dynamic life. And if they do it of their own volition, Amma says it is joyful. You can do it on your own terms. But if you don't, the only other option is you're going to be forced out of activity under circumstances you cannot control. The former is a peaceful ending. The latter is a painful ending. Sometimes we also may feel that our activities are more important than our sadhana. This happens to everybody, I would say. Can't do this because I got to do that. I can't sit down, I can't do my mantra, we have a lot of reasons not to do certain sadhanas, but we have lots of reasons why we should do other things. This shows that Rajas is really overpowering our sattva guna at that time. I don't consider myself an exemption. We all have to be careful. And once Rajas overpowers sattva, even spiritual books won't feel interesting. We won't want to study anything, go to any classes. Even Amma's satsangs, we won't be able to concentrate. So, and since the momentum is now heading downwards, after a while, what's below Rajas, Tamas, we're going to start feeling sleepy. And the next thing you know, the book slips through your hand and clunk, it falls on the floor because you fell asleep. So, don't try to read scriptures after lunch. That's not going to work. And he used that word restlessness in this verse also. Shankaracharya says it's just the lack of tranquility. It's the opposite of regulating our thoughts. That means we allow the mind to run amok. Our thoughts control us rather than the other way around as it should be. Thoughts constantly pop up without our permission. That is the problem. Thoughts of Amma would be great. Thoughts of God, thoughts of, peace, world peace, and compassion. These would be great. But we're talking about negative and disturbing thoughts that are coming up without our permission. So we can call that a really restless state. It's mental turbulence. And the mind is constantly wandering. The word greed and longing are very similar. Shankaracharya says that that longing word is kind of just in general for all things. Greed is maybe a little more specific, and that other word, longing, is just in general you want to experience a lot of things. Now, let's hear what Jnanadev has to say about Rajas, which is always inspiring his words. When Rajas waxes strong, suppressing Tamas and Sattva, he runs riot. Just as in a hurricane all things are rushed through and wound up together and whirled round and round in the sky, in that way, with the force of Rajas, all the senses are let loose on the objects. It's like a stampede. He does not consider it in any way objectionable to cast a lustful eye on another man's wife, and allows the senses to indulge unrestrained in the enjoyment of their objects, like the mouth of a sheep that strays out grazing on whatever it finds. That's what we are. We're just grazing on everything that comes in our path. His greed increases so much that only what lies beyond his reach escapes him. His vasanas do not permit him to keep his hands off any improper business transactions he may make. He undertakes works of vast magnitude, yet his desire for pleasure in this world and the next one remain unquenched. There moves about in his heart a greed for pleasure of such a boundless and tremendous magnitude that the extent and depth of an ocean falls short in comparison, or the burning power of fire proves too mild and tame before it. Very strong desires for enjoyment gallop abreast of the mind with great hope, and while wandering in this way, it traverses the entire universe. Sound like something you want to do? Sound like something you want to get involved with? I doubt it. But this is what Rajas makes us do. So it's a very good lesson to hear it in this way. Now, if that's Rajas, think how bad Tamas is going to be, all right? That's next. The first half of this verse we also have to chant together. Aprakasho pravrittischa pramado moha evacha tamasyetani jayante vivruddhe kurunandana. Dullness, inertness, heedlessness, and delusion, these arise when tamas is dominant, O descendant of Kuru. So you can see that I've changed a lot. Dullness is just dullness in the original, but of course our translation is not wrong. It's just that that could go in parentheses. We're talking about the mind and senses, not like some physical dullness. Disinclination, perform one's obligatory duties. That's the Shankaracharya commentary of this. But the original Sanskrit word is inertness. And frivolity and stupor just felt a little archaic. So I replaced it with heedlessness and delusion. So dullness, the actual meaning of the word in Sanskrit is darkness. So darkness, it's aprakasha, so it's just a lack of light. So that darkness refers to the mind, as our ashram translation shows. And Shankaracharya helps us understand this process because he says that dullness is due to aviveka, or the lack of discernment, and those three qualities that follow aviveka, or the lack of discernment or dullness, the three that follow that come from that dullness, or come from that aviveka, that lack of discernment. In other words, inertness, heedlessness, and delusion come from the dullness. and the dullness is what is intended by aprakasha or darkness. So what happens when tamas or tamoguna is dominant? Remember, I'm going to say it again later, but I'm going to say it here now. This is not for evaluating other people. We have to listen to this and say, when do I feel like that? When am I like that? And what can I do to stop that? So, when tamoguna is dominant, it means that sattva and rajas are very minimal, obviously. You cannot have tamas if there's a lot of sattva, or even if there's a lot of rajas. So, the luminosity, brightness, and alertness of sattva will not be there, as well as the usual activity and dynamism of rajoguna. What's left? Well, gloomy inertia and an overall dullness. That's all is left. So you may have met people who, you probably feel sorry for them also, that they just don't want to do anything. They're so confused, they're so in a very gloomy place. They can't get up for anything. They can't really motivate themselves to do anything. And if something absolutely needs to be done, they may try to make other people do it for them, or they may wait for a number of tasks to pile up before they get into action. And there will, even though we talked about carelessness before, it's coming up here also as heedlessness. We could also call it carelessness, or we would say ashraddha in Amma's jargon. So what happens? Well, how does that look when someone is heedless or when they have the lack of shraddha? Well, let's say you ask them to do something. They won't do it properly. They might leave it half finished, or they might do a sloppy job or do it incorrectly. So when we do that, that means we have succumbed to tamas. And someone else might have to rectify our mistakes or clean up after us. Or you may have to do that for somebody else. But these are evidence of tamas. It includes oversight, carelessness, mistakes. All these things are from tamas. And then he used that word delusion, which can mean many things. When we are deluded, we tend to misjudge things. Little things may seem really important, even though they're not. And really important things can seem not so important, and later on we suffer because we realize we overlooked that. We make the wrong decisions often when we're deluded. We think that we got to do this, it's most important, or this person, is really important. I got to give them priority in my life or something. Later on you realize that these things were wrong decisions. And our procrastination is, of course, also tamas. And tamas can make us so deluded that we may mistake our stagnation for a kind of self-sufficiency. You're like, I'm fine. I don't have to do anything. I'm just going to hang here. I don't need anything. I'm peaceful. I'm good. But actually, there's a really deep inner stagnation taking place, because we're still having 3 meals per day. We're still, expecting our life to be comfortable. We're still, counting on other people to do things for us. But then we ourselves are stagnating. We might think that we're self-reliant, but it can deceive us in that way too. It's really tamas. So be careful when you feel like that. You have to ask yourself honestly, am I really self-sufficient? Am I really just peaceful? Or am I kind of falling into tamas? So more about these indicators will come up in chapter 18. A lot of indicators, not just of tamas, but rajas and sattva. So we'll go into that in more depth then. That's a ways away. But this is enough for now. We basically have the idea. And I think we can understand how it manifests in each one of us. And we're going to also talk about how to overcome that as well. So with this verse, the description of the indicators of each of the gunas is over. And like I said a moment ago, the purpose of this section is to enable us to assess our own state at any given time. And only then will we be able to apply the right counterattack with either rajas or sattva. And we never use this to judge other people, okay? Promise? Not going to use this to judge other people. You know, in the Gita it says the people like you are tamasic. Who's going to appreciate it if we say something like that? And definitely don't say it at home with your family members. It's very dangerous. It's injurious to your health, I'm sure. So the reason why we don't do that above all else is that spirituality is about us evolving. It's nothing to do with other people. In fact, without even looking at other people, we should be able to grow spiritually. Forget about what other people are doing, unless you're inspired by them. That's the only, like Amma. That's the only good thing about looking at people. But if we look at them to justify our weaknesses or to think negatively of them, why they do that? I don't do that. This is just a waste of time, and it takes us farther away from our true self rather than helping us move forward. And whenever we try to change the mind, we should remember that the mind's first reaction is going to be resistance. It doesn't want to. And it will always use this as a ruse, or it'll employ it as a tactic to divert attention away from changing the mind and towards other people's actions. Look at that guy, look what he's doing, he's lazy. Look at her, she doesn't do anything, and then these people are doing that and they're doing this. And then what happens is that the mind can, in that way, the mind can escape the focus being on itself. And because the mind is going to say, look, which is easier, changing myself or talking about other people? Sure, it's easier to talk about other people. It doesn't require any effort. But when we succumb to that, we are not only not improving, we're going backwards. So we really have to be careful about that. Now, what does Jnanadev have to say about tamas? Tamas waxes strong after swallowing rajas and sattva, resulting in the following signs. The mind in tamas becomes like the sky on an amavasya night. Amavasya means the new moon when there's neither a moon nor a sun. He says, like the sky on an amavasya night having neither the sun nor the moon. Similarly, the heart becomes blank, inactive, and dull. There remains no vivacity in it, while all vestige of reasoning is lost. The intellect loses all its elasticity and becomes so hard that even a stone cannot compare with it, while the memory goes into oblivion. The arrogance of carelessness resounds through the body, while the being continues his usual dealings full of sheer foolishness. The bones, in the form of breaches of good manners, give painful pricking to the senses, and yet he continues to behave in the same way, despite the mortal agonies it produces. There is one more novel thing about it. The mind of the tamas-laden being gets enlivened while doing wicked actions. Like an owl gets vision in the dark, his mind is fired with wild expectations when confronted with the idea of a forbidden action. And the senses also gallop off in hot pursuit of the same. Here's the way he portrays everything, just really grabs your attention. In this way, the being staggers without being drunk, rants without being delirious in fever, and gets infatuated like a madman even in the absence of love. He is in an ecstasy that is not due to the mind getting immersed in concentrated meditation. He is merely possessed by insolent infatuation. Okay. Anybody interested in signing up for tamas? I have a sheet of paper here. You can just sign your name here. I want that. That sounds good to me. Nobody wants it, right? But it still happens. Why? Because we are not aware. It's unconsciously happening. Happens to all of us. I'm not an exception. I'm just saying that what we need to do is become more aware of those bhavas, those, times when we're in these different phases. So I hope that this part of the chapter helps all of us call our own attention to those phases so that we can be more cautious and pull ourselves out of a tailspin before it gets really dangerous. Now from the next verse, Krishna moves on to another topic, which is how to liberate ourselves from the tyranny of these gunas. Anybody interested in hearing that? I would imagine all of us need to hear it, because right now we are tyrannized. Verse 14. Yada sattve pravriddhetu pralayam yati dehabhrit tadottama vidam lokan amalan pratipadyate. I change this a lot also. If the embodied one goes to dissolution when sattva is dominant, he reaches the pure worlds attained by those who know the highest. You might say, is this the same verse that I was thinking it was? Okay, now let me explain why I changed that. If one, as the original text goes, it misses that, I guess if there's no commentary, it's better to have it the way the ashram version is for sure. But since we have a chance to talk about it, I'd like to explain that the word used is, it means the embodied one. And it's helpful for us to think of ourselves as an embodied one, because it means you can also be disembodied. It means you leave the body and the body is not you. That's what happens at the time of death, and birth is when we enter the body, so to speak. Maybe we're not actually born yet, but the soul enters the womb at one point, and so then we become embodied. And he says, goes to dissolution, instead of saying die. Our translation says dies because, if you just write goes to dissolution, no one's going to know what it means. But dissolution is helpful in one way, because when you leave the body, it means that body is going to be dissolved. The only reason why the body remains in this shape without turning into mud in a few days is that there's consciousness reflected in the subtle body here. But once that subtle body leaves, dissolution starts. Just like the universe dissolves, well, this body is going to dissolve. And remember last time I think I said that S-A-T-T-W-A is not the normal way of doing it. We would write V instead of W. That's the more like the scholarly way, just as a small correction. Attain was coming twice, so I put the first one, reaches. And the spotless ethereal regions seemed a little too verbose and archaic, so the direct translation is pure worlds. Attained by whom? By, our translation was those of noble deeds, which is true in meaning, but the actual verse is the ones who know the highest. So we'll talk about that, what that means. Krishna's first approach of how to liberate ourselves from these gunas is an explanation of what happens after death. So then, in some sense, death is liberating us from those gunas to some degree. And he describes what happens if a person leaves their body while a particular guna is dominant. Always one guna or another will be dominant. What kind of birth are they going to get? And he starts this topic by addressing the question for a sattvic person. So let's say we are in sattva guna, or we have a predominance of sattva guna when we leave this body. what's going to happen? He says we are going to go to higher worlds, which means we will get a better birth next time. And if we say worlds, like multiple, then really what we're talking about is very highly evolved beings. Because your average human being doesn't have a preponderance of sattva, first of all. And even if they have a lot of sattva, they're not necessarily going to go to Brahmaloka or Vaikunta or something like that. One of these worlds we hear about in the Puranas and some other scriptures. So don't think that we're going to go to some higher realm necessarily. Shankaracharya says in his commentary, they go to worlds like Brahmaloka, etc. But that doesn't really refer to us. Where are we going to go then? That's the question, right? Well, hate to say it, but we're most likely to come back as a human on birth. It's just same old reruns, but in a way that's better. Because even if we go to heaven, Amma says, when your bank balance of good karma is depleted, you have to come back down and start all over again. So, since we're with Amma, hopefully we will, if there's another birth, which there probably is for most of us, we will be reborn as a human being, not as a god in Brahmaloka or something like that. Hopefully not as a amoeba or a worm or something. We want to be with Amma. We want to be in a spiritual life. So we come back as a human being and we pick up where we left off. Perhaps taking birth in a highly cultured family, we get a good education, and then we can turn to spirituality early in our life. So the summary is that for such people who have sattva as dominant, their next birth will be superior to the one before. And if you want to understand a little bit more about this concept of coming back and resuming where we left off, you can refer to chapter 6, verses 41 through 45, because we already covered that a long time ago. And because Arjuna asks a question that sort of elicits that answer from Krishna. Now, those who know the highest, what does that mean? If it meant self-knowledge, there's no question of them being reborn in any world, for that matter, right? Because they're liberated. If you have self-knowledge, there's nothing left. If you remain in the body till death, then you can, when you leave the body, you become liberated. Or some people, upon attaining God realization, they just leave the body right then. So it could be either way. But the point is that it's not that kind of knowledge, because Krishna is saying that he's coming back again. So it is a reference to one, we know from the commentaries, that it is a reference to one who worships the highest, hasn't actually known God as his own self or her own self. It's a reference to somebody who worships God as the highest. So it's not Atmajnana, right? It's pointing to someone who worships God wholeheartedly. And that's probably why our translation says somebody of noble deeds, because they are always thinking of the highest. So what is so great about other worlds? Let's say, in the scriptures it says Brahmaloka. Why would anybody want to go there? Well, Krishna is pointing out that they're free, they're pure. They're free from all impurity and evils like suffering. So the idea is that, especially in the ancient times when Krishna's teaching was given, the culture was such that people were trying to be, liberated from suffering. People are now too, but they don't pray to God. They don't think of God as a source to ending their suffering most of the time. So a sattvic person may go to a higher world, perhaps a very advanced person, where there's no suffering. And that is compared with this world. Such higher worlds, or we could call them heavens, they're more pleasant. It's like someone saying, I'd rather spend the winter in Hawaii than Chicago. It's relatively more pleasant, that's all. But if you go to Hawaii, you don't think you're going to find anybody who has sorrow? Of course, I used to live there. A lot of people are in sorrow there. In fact, it's hard to find a happy person anywhere in the world. Because complete absence of sorrow is mukti. It's liberation. So there's always going to be sorrow, even though there may not be physical suffering. So that's what this verse is saying, is that in heaven, there's no physical suffering. But we have to read between the lines and understand that it doesn't mean that there's no sorrow. Until we realize the self, there will always be some kind of sorrow of some kind. And in the absence of any physical hardship, the mind becomes weaker and weaker. And then when our good karma balance is depleted, we come back down and start all over again, like I said. Some of you may remember what Krishna said back in chapter 8. It was verse 6 when he said, whatever one thinks of when leaving the body, that and that alone he reaches, being absorbed in that thought. Now, someone may wonder, which one is correct? This verse, chapter 14, verse 14, or chapter 8, verse 6? Is it what you think at the end of your life, or is it the guna that is dominant in you that determines what happens after death? Well, it's actually the same thing. They're both correct if you look at it in one way. One who has sattva guna dominant in his or her life, both the body, mind, in the body, mind, and intellect, that person will surely think of God at the time of leaving the body. So it's the same concept, but just expressed in a different way. One is living a life that enables you to think of God at the moment you leave the body. The other one is a description of it from the standpoint of guna. Sattva, living a sattvic life, is what enables you to think of God at the end of your life when you leave the body. Just the same concept from two different angles. Now, Yanadev had one portion that I'd like to share with you, some celebratory remarks about the one who leaves the body in sattva guna. Should death intervene just at this juncture during the expansion of sattva, it should be considered as an occasion for festivity, like the arrival of guests from heaven. Wow. You have a guest who comes from heaven to your house. What are you going to do? You're going to celebrate. I guess that's what they used to do back then. I don't think we've met anybody who came from heaven. But you get the picture. It's a really special, festive concept to have somebody leave the body when they have preponderance of sattva. But that also kind of sends shivers down our spine. What about me? Because I may not be sattva, I might be rajas. What if I'm tamas? Oh, what's going to happen to me when I leave my body? That's what we're going to find out next week. So if you want to know what's going to happen, you better come back next week. Today, we finished a little early, but I do have one question to answer. And today, because we ended the 4 verses, didn't take as long as normal, we can meditate for a little bit longer. Here's the question. My question concerns attachment. Is it always negative? My little dog has been very sick for months. Out of the blue, seizures. She has been seen by 4 vets. No one knows why. It has been hard to be detached watching her suffer, full of mucus and struggling to breathe. Wow, it sounds like a COVID situation. Really painful. Of course I pray, do Reiki, spray Amma holy water on her. Is this attachment towards her really such a bad thing? And yes, it is also compassion, but where do you draw the line? I know we need to develop equanimity toward everything, but it seems rather cold. Please elaborate. Okay. Attachment is helpful in one instance and only that one instance. That is attachment to the Guru. Because of all other forms of attachment bring suffering, and they also prevent us, they hold us down. They're like sandbags that keep the balloon of our spiritual aspiration from taking off into the wild blue yonder. So if the more we fill our balloon basket with the sandbags of attachment, the lower we're going. We may not even take off in the first place with so many attachments. So unloading those attachments is going to make our spiritual practice much easier and swifter. Having said that, some people don't have a lot of attachments, but they have really strong attachments to a few things, maybe like their pet. So I'm not sure which kind of attachment we're talking about, but typically people's pets are really precious to them. So I can understand, I won't say that it's wrong. Sometimes if they don't have children, the pet becomes a replacement for a child, or they don't have kids to raise anymore. Now they're raising their puppy or a cat or something like that. So this is just, I must say that animals, pets, often because of their innocence, they make us feel a kind of pure love. I mean, of course, it's not really love, because if you stop feeding them, they're just going to go away. Because when they get hungry, they're not going to stick around. They're going to go look for food. That's the instinct. But we do get some feeling of innocence and some kind of boost from them. If we're lonely, maybe we can kind of contain our loneliness with the pets. But in a situation like this, you're understanding now the cost of having attachment for the pet. And I would say, Amma has not told people to not have pets or anything like that. So I'm not going to say that, and definitely she understands how people identify with them. But the attachment leading to suffering is guaranteed always. There's no exemption for that, except for the Guru attachment. Because the Guru is the only thing in the whole universe that uses that attachment to help us transcend all attachment. Eventually, they also make us understand that we are one with the Guru. And there's no need to be attached. We haven't reached that yet. But when one actually realizes that they are one with the Guru, then there's no need for attachment, because it's your own self. I'm not attached to myself because I am that already, the self that I know at this time. So like that, we'll understand that Amma is also our true being. So there's no need for attachment. That's her goal. But everything else in the universe is not going to reciprocate like that. Every other kind of attachment is going to end up in suffering of some kind or another. And the degree to which we are attached is directly proportionate to the amount of suffering we're going to experience when it goes. That's the thing. See, attachment is always to something external or something that we feel is different from us. Because if we feel it's one with us, there's no need to be attached, like I said. So that thing, it comes to us, we have it for some time, and then eventually it goes away, or we go away, we leave this body, one or the other. Either way, we have to part with it eventually. It's guaranteed. So I would say in this case, you can turn this into a spiritual experience. And that would be by learning these spiritual lessons, though painful they may be, through this process. I hope the animal gets better, but eventually you're going to outlive it, I would imagine. So even if it gets better this time, you should use it as an opportunity to study your attachment and how that attachment is creating more and more pain every time the animal feels pain. Because we may think it's compassion, but often, that emotion is only extended towards things that we identify with. If we want it to be real compassion, it should be for all beings, no matter whose cat or dog or whatever it is. So let's say there's some an animal that we really don't like, we don't want to touch, like a cockroach, A lot of people don't like touching cockroaches. Let's say you see a cockroach hurt. Are we going to feel compassion for that also? If not, that shows that our compassion is very sort of unstable. And it's very selective compassion. That is actually not compassion at all. So there's a my that always gets mixed in. My cat, my dog, my relative, my family member, or whatever it is. And that is what determines whether I have compassion or not, or patience, or all those other virtues may manifest themselves in me when I'm dealing with somebody I feel identified with or who's mine in some way. But otherwise, we don't extend the same courtesy or the same compassion to the beings, human or otherwise. So the more distant the suffering feels from our heart, the less quote-unquote compassion we feel. It may be a form of compassion, but it's somewhat degraded due to our inability to see all beings equally. So people get pets to experience joy with them, but so as an extension of that, we should try to find joy in helping this poor little animal move on to the next phase. Because really, our prayer for that animal should be that it gets to be reborn in Amma's presence. It should maybe one of those little kids that's in Amrita Puri who are astounding all of us. Maybe I'm not going to say that they're but just imagine there may be people who meet Amma just because they were living with an Amma devotee over time. And then they saw the Amma picture over and over, and then they saw the owner doing arati or singing bhajans, and they got this connection with Amma, and then they were born and they got to meet Amma because of that. So you can have that prayer that these animals, your pet or whatever it might be, is getting benefit from being with an Amma devotee, and their next birth will be even better. They're graduating, they're moving on, they're getting a promotion. So you can be happy for them, even. Because it's going to happen eventually. So try to shift your standpoint if you can. And hopefully you'll see some joy in the animal leaving its body. Because undoubtedly it will have a better birth next time. Namah Shivaya. So I think that's all I have to say about that. And we can, if I think of something else, I'll add it next time. But the subject of pets is actually something that does come up sometimes. And I'll tell you a very brief story before we meditate. I had a pet when I was living in Japan before I joined the ashram. And it was the first time I went to Amrita Puri, after getting a mantra from Amma, I asked her if I could meditate in this underground cave for 3 days, and she said, yeah. And I said, wonderful, I'm such a great yogi. I'll sit down there and I'll get God realization in 3 days at meditating constantly. Not. I went down there and I stayed. I managed to stay there for about a day and a half. Then I got so restless. And my meditations were not meditations at all. I was just daydreaming about all my fantasies. And one of them was having a house, a wooden house in the mountains, and having a dog and my own car. I don't know what kind of a spiritual aspiration that is. But a couple of years later, I found myself in Japan, in the rural area, in the mountains, in a wooden house with a car and a dog. And then I was walking in the mountains with this dog, and I was like, wait a second. didn't I have some fantasy about this in a cave in India 3 years ago or 2 years ago, whatever it was? And I thought, oh my God, what am I doing? And then, the craziest thing is that the day that I left Japan to join the ashram for good, the day before that, I gave the dog to the next door neighbor. I said, look, I'm not coming back. Just can you take care of this dog? And he's like, yeah, I already got 5 of them. One more, it's not a big deal. And so I was great. I was happy that the dog is now safe. And at that time, I just wanted to be with Amma. I wasn't really worried about the dog. I really didn't care anymore, honestly. I just wanted it to be safe. But that morning that I was going to go to the airport, the guy woke me up very early and he rang my doorbell, and then he said, I'm really sorry to tell you. And I said, what? He said, when I woke up this morning, went outside, your dog was dead. And I said, what do you mean dead? And he said, we have no idea. It was dead. Nothing happened. There's no sign, no, nothing. It was perfectly healthy yesterday, and then today is dead. And I just thought to myself, okay, there was some karmic connection for sure, and because we used to be really, close buds. And the day I'm leaving for India for good, there was a she left her body. So it's fitting, maybe she's going to have a much better life next time. And because I did a lot of, thinking of Amma in the period when I had the dog. So you can think there's different takes on these things. We don't have to look at them as always bad. Namaskar. Om Asatoma Sadgamaya Tamasoma Jyotirgamaya Mrityorma Amritam Gamaya. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Lokaha Samastaha Sukhino Bhavantu. Lokaha Samastaha Sukhino Bhavantu. Lokaha Samastaha Sukhino Bhavantu. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Harihi Om. Namah Shivaya. This brings the Gita study portion of the class to an end. Those who have time, please join us to meditate as we try to assimilate these profound teachings bestowed upon us by Amma through the words of Lord Krishna. Close your eyes, please. Check your posture. Slow down the breathing process. Take a few long, deep breaths. Along with the long, deep breaths, feel that the mind is also slowing down and going deeper and deeper. Focus your awareness on the rhythmic flow of your breathing process. As we have done before, try to remain as a witness to the breathing process. You are not participating, you're not involved. You are watching as the breath flows in and out. After witnessing the breathing process for some time, try to look at your body as separate from you. Mentally take a step back and visualize the body as though you are seeing it in a mirror. If any restless thoughts arise, very gently guide the thought process back to witnessing the body. Try not to react. Just guide the mind back to the witnessing process. After remaining as a witness to the body for some time, let us remove that concept of the body and simply remain in the witness state, the witness consciousness, without any particular object. Remain a witness to everything. If you begin to feel sleepy, you can try one of two things: speed up your breath or chant your mantra silently at a fast speed for some time until your mind shakes off the tamas, then return to witnessing. If it is restless thoughts, we can counter it by chanting the mantra very slowly or slowing down the breath even more. In this way, we can respond to momentary tamas or rajas. Gradually bring your awareness back to your body. Be aware of each part of the body and your surroundings. Now we will conclude with one final mantra. Take a deep breath. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnaad Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purvameva Vashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Harihi Om. One more long deep breath. And as you exhale, you can slowly open your eyes. Om Namah Shivaya. Thank you for joining us. This Saturday the bhajans will be presented from the East Coast Ashram, Washington, D.C. And from Chicago, we'll be doing it the following weekend. And next Thursday, though, I'll see you here for the Gita class. Om Namah Shivaya.